world stands at a turning point, and once again, Africa is at the center of the storm. For centuries, the gold of Ghana, the coffee of Uganda, the cobalt of Congo, and the uranium of Niger powered empires in Europe and beyond. Railways in London, skyscrapers in Paris, and even the electricity grids of Washington were built upon the silent sacrifice of African soil. Yet, in a cruel paradox, the very lands that fed the world were left with hunger, poverty, and dependency. Today, that story is shifting. More than 10 African nations have begun to take a bold and extraordinary step. They are banning the export of raw resources. They are forcing value to remain at home. Instead of sending out unprocessed gold or unroasted coffee beans, governments are demanding refineries, factories, and industries on their own soil. For the first time in modern memory, Africa is not simply supplying raw wealth. Africa is rewriting the rules of global trade. This is not just economics. This is sovereignty. When Ghana says no to raw gold exports, or when Uganda halts unprocessed coffee shipments, it is more than policy. It is a declaration of independence spoken in the language of trade. Billions of dollars in potential added value each year could remain in African hands, transforming schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. But one haunting question remains. Can this bold defiance stand against international pressure, or will the old powers find new strings to pull? If you believe economic freedom completes moral freedom, subscribe now, share this message, and stay with us for the full journey. The tide is no longer hidden. Across Africa, a wave of decisions is unfolding, not in whispers but in proclamations carved into law. More than 10 nations have declared the same message. The age of raw exports is ending. The age of value at home is beginning. It is a collective act of defiance, and it is a collective cry of dignity. Ghana has drawn the first line in the sand. For decades, gold left its soil as raw bars, enriching traders abroad while leaving the nation vulnerable to the swings of the dollar. Now, Accra demands that at least 20% of its gold must be sold directly to the central bank in refined form. This is not simply a technical policy. It is a rewriting of monetary sovereignty. Billions of dollars in value once lost are being captured within national vaults. Gold, long the symbol of plunder, is becoming the shield of resilience. Uganda has chosen the same path with its fields of coffee and tea. No longer will unroasted beans or unprocessed leaves leave Kampala's borders. Instead, international corporations are being forced to invest in roasteries, packaging plants, and processing centers within Uganda itself. The results are already stirring. Thousands of new jobs, higher wages for farmers, and the birth of a domestic brand identity denied for generations. The world's coffee giants, accustomed to dictating terms, now find themselves negotiating on Uganda's terms. In Gabon and Mozambique, forests have ceased to be a free gift to the globe. By banning the export of raw logs, both nations are turning sawmills and furniture factories into engines of growth. Gabon's wood sector alone is projected to generate over $2 billion annually in domestic value, while Mozambique's emerging furniture exports are already employing thousands. What once left African shores as cheap timber is now being reborn as tables, flooring, and craftsmanship tied to local pride. Guinea has taken the battle to the dinner table. For too long, rice, maize, and cassava were shipped abroad, while local families faced shortages and rising prices. With a single decree, Conakry has reversed the equation: feed the people first and only then trade abroad. By keeping 1.5 million tons of grain at home each year, the nation is cutting dependence on imports by 40%, saving nearly $600 million annually in foreign exchange. Markets report steadier supplies, and rural farmers now take dignity in knowing their harvest nourishes their own citizens first. And then comes Niger with uranium. 70% of France's electricity has flowed from nuclear power built upon Nigerian ore. Paris thrived. Villages in Niamey often stood in darkness. That paradox shattered when Niger announced sweeping restrictions on uranium exports. Analysts warn that even a 20% cut could cost France more than $3 billion annually and drive household electricity bills higher across Europe. For Niger, this was more than an economic maneuver. It was a thunderclap of sovereignty, a reminder that the lights of Paris had long burned on the shadows of Niamey. Across the continent, the same rhythm is playing. No more raw exports, no more pennies on the dollar. From Namibia and the Democratic Republic of Congo insisting on local refining of cobalt and lithium, to Zimbabwe declaring that chrome must be smelted before leaving Harare's soil, to Côte d'Ivoire capping cocoa exports and forcing chocolate factories to rise in Abidjan, the script is consistent. Africa is not begging for value. Africa is claiming it. It is a movement not of charity, but of justice. Not of dependency, but of design. The numbers may look like cold statistics, but they tell a story of hospitals unbuilt, classrooms unfurnished, wages unpaid. Now, those same numbers tell a different tale of schools funded, jobs created, infrastructure strengthened. Yet the question lingers, and it is a question that hangs heavy in the air. If these nations can rewrite the rules at home, how long before the old empires rewrite their tactics abroad? The tremor is felt far beyond Africa's borders. Markets in New York, Brussels, and Paris have begun to quiver, not from earthquakes of the earth, but from the quakes of policy. Cocoa futures surged by 22% in just 3 months. Uranium contracts in Paris leapt 18%, shaking the very pillars of Europe's nuclear heart. What was once assumed to be secure, cheap supply from Africa, is now questioned with trembling lips. And in the center of this storm stands Niger. For decades, 70% of France's electricity flowed from nuclear power stations fueled by uranium mined under Nigerian skies. Lights in Paris glowed, trains ran, factories thrived, while villages in Niamey remained dark. This was the cruel paradox. France's independence was purchased with Niger's dependence. But that illusion shattered when Niger drew a line and declared that uranium would no longer flow without fair return. The numbers bite. Even a 20% cut could cost France more than $3 billion annually in replacement contracts. It could drive up electricity bills for European families. Brussels scrambled for alternative sources from Kazakhstan to Canada, but none could fill the gap quickly. Overnight, Niger jolts France's 70% power, exposing the hidden fragility of a system that had long depended on Africa's silence. In Washington, policymakers turned their gaze not only to uranium, but to cobalt, lithium, and gold, the minerals that shape the 21st century economy. Electric vehicles, semiconductors, defense technologies all depend on resources that Africa now demands to refine at home. Think tanks warned of a resource nationalism crisis, while corporations lobbied for fresh trade deals. Behind closed doors, quiet warnings echoed, "Do not let Africa drift toward Beijing or Moscow." For in Beijing, opportunity was already seized. China has been financing smelters in the Democratic Republic of Congo and lithium processing plants in Namibia. With every ban on raw exports, Chinese state-owned companies present themselves not as traders, but as partners ready to build on African soil. In Moscow, the rhetoric is more fiery. Russian voices praise Africa's defiance as justice delayed but not denied, a welcome challenge to Western dominance. Europe, meanwhile, is caught between alarm and denial. Germany and Italy convene emergency task forces over coffee and cocoa supplies. Chocolate manufacturers in Switzerland and Belgium speak of factory slowdowns. Energy ministers whisper of rising household costs. For the first time in living memory, Europe is not dictating the terms. It is reacting to them. Even within Africa, the reverberations are complex. The African Union issues a cautious statement, recognizing the legitimacy of resource sovereignty, but urging prudence to avoid retaliation. Within ECOWAS, divisions sharpen. Nigeria, flush with oil revenues, counsels gradual reform. Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Mali push boldly ahead, insisting that hesitation is the very reason Africa remained chained to the bottom of global value chains. And in the streets, the story takes on a life of its own. Hashtags trend across TikTok and X. Africa for Africans. Resource sovereignty. Over 100 million views echo the same refrain. This is not merely economics. This is justice. Memes mock the old colonial order. Viral videos celebrate cocoa farmers and gold miners as architects of independence. Murals in Ouagadougou and Bamako paint new heroes, leaders who dared to say no to the old rules. Listen to the emotion. Pride in Lagos, fire in Nairobi, joy in Johannesburg. It is not a dry debate about contracts. It is identity. It is history. It is the reclamation of dignity. Where the world sees instability, ordinary Africans see justice. But the storm clouds are gathering. Multinational lobbies push harder. Western financial institutions whisper of sanctions, aid reductions, and reevaluated loans. Investors warn of capital flight. What is celebrated on the streets of Africa is whispered against in the corridors of Washington, Brussels, and Paris. And so we stand at a climax. On one side, nations reclaiming their dignity. On the other, powers accustomed to control. The market trembles, the world adjusts, and the question is no longer if Africa can shake the system. It already has. The question is whether Africa can withstand the countershake of retaliation. Will this be remembered as the dawn of Africa's second independence, one not on battlefields but in trade agreements? Or will the storm of sanctions and financial pressure bend the continent back toward dependency? The shift is not only written in headlines, it is felt in markets, in villages, and households across the continent. The decision to ban raw exports is not an abstract decree. It is a change in the daily bread, the wages in the hand, the price at the market stall, and the consequences cut in two directions: promise and peril. First, the promise. Where gold once left Ghana as crude bullion, now the refining at home is injecting billions into the national economy. Hospitals that once waited for foreign loans can be built from local revenue. Classrooms no longer depend on aid packages. They can be funded by the wealth of the land itself. Uganda's ban on raw coffee exports has already created thousands of jobs in roasting, packaging, and logistics. Farmers who once received mere pennies now earn higher wages, and for the first time, Ugandan coffee carries a domestic brand identity on supermarket shelves abroad. In Mozambique, furniture factories hum with new life. Workers once cutting logs for export now build tables and flooring, training in skills that turn labor into craftsmanship. Gabon's sawmills project billions in added domestic value, transforming timber from a curse of exploitation into a ladder of opportunity. Guinea's farmers, too, walk taller. Knowing that their rice and cassava feed their own citizens before leaving for foreign markets gives them pride that no foreign price could purchase. And yet, side by side with these gains, new tensions arise. Prices in some regions have risen by 8 to 12% within a single quarter. Restricting exports means local supply is prioritized, but it also means short-term shocks in trade flows. Traders whisper, if cocoa brings pride abroad, will it bring bread at home? In Guinea, market women ask whether banning grain exports will keep their families stable or leave them facing inflation. In Burkina Faso, some worry that increasing state stakes in mines may concentrate wealth in the presidency rather than in public services. This is the dual face of sovereignty. It can inspire, but it can also divide. Universities hold conferences celebrating resource independence, while farmers wonder when they will taste the benefits. Youth activists chant slogans of dignity, but the unemployed demand jobs now, not promises tomorrow. Pride can sustain for a season, but hunger asks daily questions. The risk of corruption shadows the promise of prosperity. If new revenues vanish into elite networks, then the export bans could backfire, feeding cynicism instead of hope. Sovereignty can inspire, but without transparency, it can fracture. Export bans can create industries, but without accountability, they can create monopolies. And so the test is governance. Will leaders direct these new streams of wealth into schools, hospitals, and power grids? Imagine if $10 billion each year were ring-fenced for education across the continent. Imagine a renewable energy fund financed not by foreign donors, but by cobalt and lithium revenues kept at home. Such choices could transform not only economies, but societies. But if revenues are squandered, if corruption siphons away the promise, then the movement risks becoming a noble failure, a dream soured by mismanagement. The stakes could not be higher. The future of Africa's second independence rests not only on policies of export bans, but on the daily practice of just governance. The emotional rhythm is clear. Pride swells as factories rise, jobs multiply, and revenues stay home. Anxiety follows as prices rise, as questions of fairness sharpen. Hope returns if transparency proves stronger than greed. This rhythm is the heartbeat of a continent at a crossroads. And so, we turn the question back to the people, to the listeners, to the watchers of history. Where should the first dividends of sovereignty go? To classrooms for children? To clinics for the sick? To power grids for the villages still dark? What would you choose if you held the pen that writes this new chapter? Because the chapter is being written, and history will remember not only the policy, but the priorities. Will pride outlast the price spikes, or will promises fade before factories are finished? When we look across the Atlantic, the story does not stop in Accra, Kampala, or Niamey. It reaches Washington, New York, and Atlanta. For those of us in the United States, especially those whose roots trace back to the soil of Africa, the message is more than distant policy. It is a mirror of our own history. We remember the plantations, the steel mills, the shipyards. We know what it means for labor to be consumed while dignity is denied. The same paradox that once bound our ancestors, work without wealth, contribution without control, is the paradox Africa is now breaking. And so, when a cocoa farmer in Côte d'Ivoire says, "Our beans will not leave raw any longer," or when a miner in Burkina Faso declares, "Gold is sovereignty," their voices resonate with the memory of civil rights chants in Selma, Montgomery, and Washington, D.C. For America, the implications are twofold. First, the economic. Our electric cars, our smartphones, our defense industries all depend on cobalt, lithium, and rare minerals, resources that now demand value be added in Africa. A stable, transparent Africa is not only good for Africans, it is essential for American industries that rely on secure supply chains. Fair partnership is not charity. It is necessity. Second, the moral. If America proclaims liberty, it must also support justice abroad. To invest in Africa's factories instead of stripping its mines, to partner in refining rather than extract and abandon, is to embody the values America claims to stand for. This is not foreign aid. This is reciprocity. And for African Americans, there is a deeper call. Churches, community funds, and diaspora investors can be part of this transformation, supporting small industries, training centers, and cooperative ventures that root prosperity in African soil. The same pulpits that once thundered against segregation can now speak for economic freedom across the ocean. But a question looms. Will America rise to this moral and strategic opportunity, or will it retreat to old habits of control, allowing others to step into partnership while Washington lags behind? If partnership replaces pity, can America help build factories instead of just buying futures? The bans are not the end of the story. They are the beginning of a long road. Policy alone does not secure freedom. It is the choices that follow, the structures built, the revenues managed, the alliances forged, that will determine whether this movement becomes a lasting revolution or a passing wave. There are 5 pillars that must hold firm. The first is transparency. Contracts must be public, revenues accounted for, and leaders held to the standard of service rather than secrecy. The second is future funds, ring-fenced reserves dedicated to schools, hospitals, and infrastructure so that today's wealth builds tomorrow's opportunity. The third is skills and training. Refineries and factories cannot thrive without a generation of engineers, technicians, and entrepreneurs ready to lead. The fourth is responsibility to the land, standards for environment and safety that ensure sovereignty does not become self-destruction. The fifth is regional unity. A single nation can be pressured, but an alliance of nations can negotiate as equals. The Sahel Alliance shows a glimpse of this power. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, once dismissed as fragile, now present themselves as a bloc of 80 million people holding vast reserves of gold, uranium, and oil. By pooling resources and bargaining collectively, they can secure better contracts, finance joint infrastructure, and withstand external pressure. It is proof that neighbors locking arms can transform vulnerability into strength. But the path forward is not without shadows. Foreign capitals watch with unease. Sanctions may be whispered, investment freezes threatened, diplomatic carrots and sticks deployed to divide alliances. And within Africa itself, elites tied to old contracts may resist reform, tempted by the quick gains of foreign cash over the slow harvest of domestic industry. Yet hope is not naive, it is deliberate. Across the continent, students, farmers, engineers, and elders sense that history is offering a window of possibility. They know the sacrifices may be real, the price spikes painful, the adjustments difficult. But they also know the cost of silence, another century of extraction, another century of dependency. The gamble is simple yet profound. Endure short-term pain for long-term independence. Choose pride with pressure rather than comfort with chains. And so the question is not only about governments, it is about people. Will ordinary citizens demand transparency, insist on accountability, and protect the gains of sovereignty from the erosion of corruption? Because the future of Africa's second independence will not be written in speeches alone. It will be written in classrooms built, in lights switched on, in wages paid, in dignity restored. When sovereignty meets skill, does the factory of the future carry the mark Made in Africa? From the beginning, this story has carried the weight of centuries. Gold that built railways in London but left villages in Ghana without light. Coffee that filled European cafes while farmers in Uganda struggled to eat. Uranium that powered Paris while Nigerian families lived in darkness. This is the anger that lingers in memory, the truth of exploitation hidden behind the mask of trade. There is also regret, the bitter recognition of opportunities lost. Decades of raw exports drained trillions in potential value. Schools unbuilt. Hospitals never opened. Young people leaving home in search of what should have been found in their own soil. These are the tears of yesterday's choices, the sighs of a continent that gave more than it kept. But today, there is hope. Across Africa, the ground is shifting. 10+ African export bans have declared that value will remain at home. Factories are rising, jobs are being created, revenues are being recaptured. In Niamey, one policy shook Europe so deeply that headlines read, Niger Jolts France's 70% power. In Accra, in Kampala, in Abidjan, voices proclaim a new truth. Sovereignty is not for sale. The vision is clear. If this momentum holds, Africa will no longer be painted as the world's warehouse, but as the world's workshop. Not the periphery of industry, but the partner of progress. Imagine hospitals financed without loans, power grids lit by local revenues, classrooms filled because minerals were refined at home. This is not a dream, it is a choice. And yet, the final question rests not in boardrooms, but with people. Will citizens demand transparency? Will leaders resist corruption? Will communities insist that sovereignty serve not only pride, but the daily needs of the people? Brothers and sisters, history is watching. The second independence is unfolding not on battlefields, but in contracts, policies, and factories. And the decision of whether this becomes a revolution or a lost opportunity rests in the hands of those who believe dignity cannot be delayed. 10+ African export bans have opened the door, but it is the people who must walk through it. What do you believe Africa is shaping? A passing wave or a new world order of justice? If this vision speaks to your spirit, share this video, subscribe for the next chapter, and leave a comment below. Your voice is part of this movement, and together we will keep watch until freedom is complete.